The movie begins by showing a young guy named Li Huan. He was the leader of a group of tough guys who would often pick fights with rival gangs. Armed with just a knife, Li Huan would skillfully defeat his enemies, showing no mercy. As he took down the rival gangsters, his mind wandered to a girl named Shadyan Su. She was the love of his life and the reason behind his violent actions. Not too long ago, Li Huan was a famous professional baseball player. He reached the pinnacle of his career, earning lots of money and fame. But everything changed when he suffered a severe shoulder injury. From that point on, he lost his place in the first team and became a mere substitute player. With all his money and free time, Li Huan indulged himself in illegal gambling run by a man named Wu Ryuk. One fateful night, while Li Huan was involved in a match-fixing scheme, the police raided the place and arrested everyone, including him. Li Huan ended up bankrupt and lost everything, including his career in baseball. Sometime later, a prosecutor named Jin Woo came to Li Huan in prison, informing him that someone had arranged for his release. Jin Woo asked what Li Huan planned to do after his disgraceful exit from the baseball world. Li Huan remained silent, choosing instead to collect the money owed to him by Wu Ryuk, which he hadn't received due to the police raid. When Li Huan arrived to claim his commission, he encountered a group of gangsters led by a man named Kyung-soo. They wanted to collect a debt from Wu Ryuk. Suspicious that Kyung-soo was working with Wu Ryuk to deceive and swindle him, Li Huan grew even angrier when Kyung-soo insulted him for his involvement in the match-fixing scandal. In a fit of rage, Li Huan single-handedly beat up Kyung-soo and his gang, effortlessly overpowering them. Later, he discovered that Kyung-soo and his men had nothing to do with Wu Ryuk. Filled with remorse and regret, Li Huan visited them in the hospital to apologize for his misunderstanding. Unfortunately, Kyung-soo rejected the apology, demanding that Li Huan pay for their medical expenses and handing him his business card. Li Huan accepted the business card and promised to cover the medical bills. After leaving the hospital, Li Huan caught the attention of Kyung-soo's boss, Jung Sang-ha, who had arrived on the scene just moments after. Kyung-soo informed Sang-ha that Li Huan was the one who had beaten them and caused them to require intensive care. Intrigued by Li Huan's strength, Sang-ha scolded Kyung-soo and his men for their weakness, considering the possibility of recruiting Li Huan into his group. Meanwhile, Li Huan, who had lost everything and become homeless, wandered the streets, sleeping wherever he could find a spot. Sometime later, two men who worked for Sang-ha approached Li Huan, urging him to join them for a job that Sang-ha had in mind. On the flip side, Sang-ha and his crew were facing difficulties in collecting debts from a guy named Rockfish who owed them a huge sum of money. Every thug sent by Sang-ha to Rockfish's place came back empty-handed, bearing severe injuries. Just then, Li Huan arrived and straightforwardly asked why Sang-ha had called him there. One of Sang-ha's men, Yu-jun, wanted to strike Li Huan, thinking he was being too bold in front of their boss. Surprisingly, Sang-ha didn't seem bothered at all. He informed Li Huan that he had a job for him, promising some money in return if he completed it successfully. Li Huan, feeling obligated to compensate Kyung-soo and his men for the beating he gave them, agreed to take on the job. Kyung-soo and his gang then took Li Huan to the fish market, where they planned to collect a debt from Rockfish, who worked there as a fishmonger. As Rockfish refused to pay what he owed Sang-ha, Kyung-soo and his men launched an attack. However, Rockfish unexpectedly turned the tables on them, overpowering them effortlessly. That's when Li Huan finally stepped in, delivering a brutal beating to Rockfish. With Rockfish defeated, he agreed to settle his debts. Kyung-soo then proudly met Sang-ha, bragging about successfully collecting the money from Rockfish. But Sang-ha soon discovered that it was Li Huan who had defeated Rockfish. True to his word, Sang-ha rewarded Li Huan with some money. Surprisingly, Li Huan returned all the money to Sang-ha as compensation for beating up Kyung-soo and his men. Seeing this, Sang-ha became even more intrigued and offered Li Huan a chance to join his group. Sang-ha explained that it was the only opportunity for Li Huan to turn his life around since he had lost everything and had no money or job to support himself. Li Huan seemed interested but asked for some time to think it over. Shortly after, he went to the sports stadium, sitting in the stands, contemplating Song Ha's offer to join his gangster crew. Li Huan had lost everything and had no one to rely on, especially since his parents had passed away. After much contemplation, Li Huan made the decision to join Song Ha's group, Emperor Capital, which happened to be the largest private loan company in Busan. Apart from running the loan company, Song Ha also led an organized crime syndicate with a blend of authority, loyalty, and ruthlessness. That evening, Kyung-soo took Li Huan to Temptation, a nightclub owned by Song Ha and managed by the stunning Cha Yen-soo. Kyung-soo introduced Li Huan to Yen-soo, and immediately, Li Huan found himself captivated by her beauty and grace. During their time at the nightclub, Song Ha purposely gathered his sidekicks, including Kyung-soo, Yoo-jun, and Tae-moo, to officially announce Li Huan's membership in Emperor Capital. Although Yoo-jun and Tae-moo didn't seem thrilled about Li Huan joining their ranks, they had no choice but to accept him, as Song Ha had personally recruited him. Song Ha confirmed to his sidekicks that Li Huan was now part of their group. The next day, Song Ha assigned Li Huan to learn the ins and outs of their work at the private loan company, and for the time being, he would be working under Kyung-soo's guidance as his senior. Li Huan began his duties by plastering stickers with the company's phone number in various locations, ensuring that anyone in need of money could easily reach out. In the evenings, Kyung-soo always took Li Huan to Temptation to count the day's earnings before depositing them with Song Ha. During these moments, Li Huan secretly observed Yen-soo, who always greeted them with kindness, and he found himself increasingly drawn to her. Given Li Huan's expertise in match-fixing, he often assisted Kyung-soo and the others in making more money through rated games. 3 months passed, and Li Huan grew accustomed to his role as a debt collector, spending many nights at Temptation. One day, Song Ha offered Li Huan the opportunity to manage their gambling website, promising a promotion and a luxury car as a reward for his hard work over the past few months. In the subsequent days, Li Huan found himself visiting Temptation more frequently, yet he never mustered the courage to approach Yen-soo. That is, until one night when she scolded him for parking his car in front of the nightclub's entrance. From that moment on, Li Huan and Yen-soo grew closer, with Yen-soo even taking the initiative to ask Li Huan out on a date. While Li Huan was getting drinks for Yen-soo, he noticed a middle-aged man approaching her, attempting to flirt with her. An irritated Li Huan confronted the man when he insulted Yen-soo, calling her a prostitute. Standing up for her, Li Huan defended Yen-soo and chased away the man who was harassing her. This incident sparked Yen-soo's interest in Li Huan, and from that point forward, they began a romantic relationship. A few days later, Song Ha contacted Li Huan, informing him that he would introduce him to their main investor, Han-duk. To Li Huan's surprise, he discovered that Han-duk was the same middle-aged man who had tried to seduce Yen-soo. However, Han-duk chose to avoid mentioning their encounter in front of Song Ha. Han-duk was an investor who sponsored various gangster groups and maintained close relationships with government officials to serve his own interests. During the meeting, Han-duk warned Song Ha about the impending release of his rival, Cutter, from prison. He advised Song Ha to stay vigilant as Cutter might seek revenge. As time went by, Li Huan's involvement in Song Ha's group propelled their business to grow rapidly. Song Ha even expanded their operations legally, aiming to increase profits and expand their influence in Busan. With Li Huan's impressive fighting skills and Song Ha's dedication, Li Huan became Song Ha's trusted right-hand man. Within a few months, Li Huan rose to a higher position than Kyung-soo, and his relationship with Yen-soo grew stronger. 3 years later, Song Ha successfully transformed his private loan company into the largest financial institution in Busan. He appointed Li Huan as one of the directors of the company, solidifying his trust in him. One day, Song Ha contacted Li Huan, urging him to temporarily step down from his position at Emperor Capital. The public had begun scrutinizing Li Huan due to his past involvement in a match-fixing scandal, and Song Ha emphasized the importance of maintaining the company's reputation as it had become a legitimate and well-respected business. Although Li Huan was hesitant to resign, Sangha assured him that he would resolve the issue. He instructed Li Huan to resume managing the gambling site and the temptation. Meanwhile, Taemu and Yujun, still harboring resentment towards Li Huan, attempted to confront him and tarnish his image in front of Sangha. However, Sangha, now the boss of the largest private loan company in Busan, made it clear to Taemu that Li Huan was a valued member of their family. He also cautioned Taemu about the impending release of Cutter from prison, advising them to be cautious. Eventually, Cutter was released and held a deep grudge against Sangha, feeling betrayed by his former comrade. Simultaneously, Han-duk met Yen-su and instructed her to control Li Huan. Han-duk aimed to eliminate Sangha, who had become arrogant and insubordinate, as he believed Sangha no longer needed his support. Yen-su was reluctant to involve Li Huan with Han-duk, but felt obligated to comply with Han-duk's orders due to a debt she owed him. A few days later, Han-duk met with Li Huan and offered him capital to establish his own company, thereby freeing him from working under Sangha. Unbeknownst to them, Taemu secretly dispatched his men to monitor their activities and reported their interactions to Sangha. Taemu sought to provoke Sangha into removing Li Huan, hoping to regain his position as one of Sangha's trusted allies. Learning of Taemu's actions, Sangha instructed Li Huan to relocate the gambling site server to a secure location to avoid attracting police attention. He promised to reinstate Li Huan's original position if he successfully completed the task. While Li Huan complied with Sangha's orders, he contemplated Han-duk's offer to establish his own business and contemplated sharing this information with Sangha. On the other hand, Han-duk pressured Yen-su to persuade Li Huan to accept his offer, reminding her of the debt she owed and using it as leverage, even resorting to inappropriate advances. Yen-su had reached her limit with Han-duk, who consistently treated her as if she were a prostitute and constantly harassed her because of her outstanding debt to him. Despite her frustration, Yen-su felt trapped, as Han-duk would threaten her life if she didn't comply with his demands. When she arrived home, she headed straight to the bedroom, ignoring Li Huan's inquiries. Observing her despondent state, Li Huan assumed that Sangha was pressuring Yen-su to work tirelessly to repay her debt. While Yen-su did owe Sangha money, what truly bothered her was Han-duk's mistreatment. The following day, Li Huan approached Sangha, requesting that he release Yen-su from her debt. Li Huan offered to pay off the entire amount owed by Yen-su. Sangha didn't mind this arrangement as long as Li Huan fulfilled his financial obligations, including the interest. However, Sangha expressed some disappointment in Li Huan, believing that Li Huan's decisions were driven primarily by his romantic feelings for Yen-su, even though Li Huan had immense potential to become a leader within the criminal organization, similar to Sangha. Soon after, Sangha and Han-duk were seen surveying an area near the pier, where Sangha envisioned constructing a resort. Facing financial limitations, Sangha proposed to Han-duk that he invest in the project. Han-duk stated that he would consider it, recognizing the substantial amount of money required. On their way home, they unexpectedly encountered Cutter and his group, seeking revenge. Fortunately, Sangha's men arrived in the nick of time, preventing Cutter from overpowering them. Outnumbered, Cutter was forced to retreat. Before leaving, Cutter issued a chilling threat, promising to kill Sangha and Han-duk in due course. Han-duk, furious upon hearing this, urged Sangha to eliminate Cutter as swiftly as possible, as their lives were at stake. The next day, an angry Sangha confronted Yen-su, blaming her for Li Huan's change in behavior. According to Sangha, Li Huan became rebellious and acted independently after getting involved with Yen-su. Later that night, Sangha commanded all his men, including Li Huan, to eliminate Cutter and his group. As they arrived at Cutter's headquarters, Li Huan led the charge. Armed only with a knife, Li Huan skillfully took down his opponents one by one in a brutal manner. However, a surprising twist occurred when Yujun suddenly stabbed Li Huan, attempting to kill him and regain his position as Sangha's right-hand man. Yet, Li Huan managed to swiftly turn the tables. Overpowering Yu Jun just then, Taemu arrived on the scene and misunderstood the situation. Thinking that Li Huan had intentionally gravely injured Yu Jun, Taemu rushed Yu Jun to the hospital while informing Sangha that Li Huan had escaped. Upon hearing the news, Sangha grew furious and ordered his men to search for Li Huan. Meanwhile, the severely wounded Li Huan tried to find help by going to Yin Su's place, but she was nowhere to be found. Li Huan attempted to reach her on her phone, but it was switched off. This led him to conclude that Sangha had kidnapped Yin Su. Shortly afterward, Li Huan confronted Sangha at a bar, demanding to know Yin Su's location. Sangha ridiculed Li Huan, mocking him for allowing himself to be influenced by a woman. Sangha suggested that Yin Su was probably enjoying herself with another man. Li Huan had no rebuttal since Yin Su's job involved catering to men, even though she was forced into it to repay her debts. Shortly after, Taemu showed up at the location, seeking revenge against Li Huan for injuring Yu Jun. However, Sangha intervened and prevented Taemu from fighting Li Huan. He reminded them that they were comrades who should support one another. An upset Sangha left the bar in frustration. As he prepared to get into his car, Cutter and his group suddenly ambushed Sangha, kidnapping him. One of Sangha's men learned about the situation and urgently contacted Li Huan, informing him about their boss's abduction. Meanwhile, Cutter took Sangha to a hideout, subjecting him to a severe beating as revenge for Sangha's past actions that had led to Cutter's imprisonment. Soon thereafter, Li Huan arrived at the scene to rescue Sangha. However, Cutter presented a condition to Li Huan. If he could defeat Cutter in combat, Cutter would reveal a secret about Sangha. Engaging in a fierce battle, Li Huan found himself overwhelmed by Cutter's superior strength. Nonetheless, Li Huan refused to surrender and persevered until he finally managed to overpower Cutter. After expressing gratitude to Li Huan for saving his life, Sangha instructed him to dispose of Cutter by burying him alive. Li Huan led Cutter to a forest and began digging a grave. Unexpectedly, Cutter revealed to Li Huan that the gambling establishment managed by Wu Ryuk actually belonged to both Cutter and Sangha. However, Sangha betrayed Cutter and took all the money for himself. Furthermore, Cutter disclosed that Sangha had specifically targeted Li Huan from the beginning, orchestrating events to ensure Li Huan ended up working for him. Hearing this shocking and infuriating revelation, Li Huan lost control of his temper and killed Cutter. With the truth now known, Li Huan resolved to seek revenge against Sangha, devising a plan to ensure Sangha ended up behind bars. Sometime later, as Sangha was about to deliver a speech before Handuk and the investors who planned to finance his resort, the police arrived and arrested Sangha. They conducted raids on Emperor Capital and Sangha's entire illegal business network. Sangha soon discovered that the mastermind behind the ambush was none other than Handuk, who had collaborated with Jinwoo and exploited Li Huan as a pawn to bring Sangha down. With Sangha imprisoned, Li Huan assumed control of Emperor Capital, becoming the ultimate leader of the criminal organization. A year later, Handuk contacted Li Huan, cautioning him against causing trouble. Handuk had received information that Li Huan was disobeying orders and becoming overly greedy. Li Huan decided to visit Sangha in prison, expecting resentment from him due to their shared knowledge of Handuk's conspiracy. Surprisingly, Sangha harbored no ill will towards Li Huan. He warned Li Huan about Handuk's cunning and greed, expressing concern that Handuk might eliminate Li Huan just as he had done to Sangha. Sangha believed that Li Huan was being used by Handuk, but Li Huan appeared indifferent to the warning, as he had taken over Sangha's position as the leader of Emperor Capital. The next day, Li Huan attended a meeting with Handuk and the shareholders. Li Huan was slated to present the annual financial report. Unexpectedly, Handuk ordered his men to kill Li Huan, deeming him too greedy and uncontrollable. However, Li Huan had anticipated this and devised a plan to have Handuk arrested. With the assistance of Jinwoo, who had gathered evidence of Handuk's crimes, Li Huan successfully orchestrated Handuk's capture. Han-duk was taken to the police station, where Jin-woo arrived to meet him. Han-duk struck a deal with Jin-woo, seeking revenge against Li Huan. Han-duk instructed Jin-woo to release Song-ha, promising to reinstate him as the highest leader in Emperor Capital if he eliminated Li Huan. Meanwhile, Li Huan eventually discovered Yen Su's whereabouts. Song-ha had freed her from her debts, allowing her to live a new and improved life, independent of Song-ha and Han-duk. A few days later, Song-ha, having been released from prison, reclaimed his position as the highest leader in Emperor Capital. However, Song-ha found himself torn regarding whether he should kill Li Huan, as Li Huan reminded him of his past self. Song-ha ultimately decided to take revenge on Han-duk by killing Jin-woo, betraying Han-duk in the process. Outraged, Han-duk ordered his men to eliminate both Song-ha and Li Huan. The following day, as Li Huan stood at the dock, Han-duk's men suddenly attacked him, inflicting injuries. At that moment, Song-ha arrived at the scene, swiftly coming to Li Huan's aid against Han-duk's men, who had been instructed to kill them. In a brutal battle, Li Huan and Song-ha fought valiantly, despite sustaining severe injuries. Soon after, Tae-mu and his group arrived to support Song-ha. Taking advantage of the distraction, Li Huan and Song-ha escaped by leaping onto the ship's deck. Li Huan took control of the vessel, embarking on a journey towards the open sea. As they sailed away, Li Huan and Song-ha finally attained true freedom, a freedom they had paid for with their own lives. The moral of the story is sometimes, even in a world of gangsters and intrigue, the greatest lesson is that friendship and loyalty can triumph over greed and betrayal as long as you have a ship and an open sea.